Good evening, students. Today, we're going to talk about global security structure. So, in this topic, we wanted to talk about since World War II, how the global security structure has been changing. Okay. So, for example, when the World War II was ended, right away, it was bipolar world. Bipolarity means two superpowers on both sides controlled the powers of the world, and all the other countries either joined with them or had a neutrality. So countries like India was neutral, claimed neutral, which means they didn't align with the United States or the Soviet Union. So Soviet Union and the United States kept the peace because of their nuclear weapons, so they wouldn't go into direct conflict, even though they fought proxy wars, which we will talk about. And proxy wars means the wars, they didn't engage directly against each other, but through others they made to fight the other one. So the first one, Cold War, it started right away with the post World War II, 1945 to 1973. And what happened was these two countries were in arms race. Arms race means the nuclear weapons created during World War II, dropped by United States in Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Later, the technology was picked up by spies of Russian origin, and the weapon was created in the Soviet Union, and they made the bomb possible. So now two countries having multiple warheads, and so they don't want to fight a war because they don't want to destroy the world. That wouldn't be good for anyone. So after that 1973, if you look at it, the Soviet Union started to weaken. It started to implode slowly inside. Its economy got problems, and it extended far bigger military budgets. It went into Afghanistan to occupy Afghanistan and fought almost a 10-year war, and they couldn't win that war. Then they retreated, and so their collapse of Soviet Union was not far. So from 1973 to 1991, it was weakening of the bipolarity. One country, United States, was becoming stronger and stronger. The other one, Soviet Union, is becoming weaker and weaker. Meanwhile, during Cold War, an important event happened, and this could be taught for a whole lecture, whole class, but we don't have the time in this. In international relations, I did do give more details, but I will give you here. It's called Cuban Missile Crisis. It happened when JFK, John F. Kennedy, was president. And what happened was, when JFK was sitting in office, his Secretary of National Security Advisor bring him photographs of Cuba, aerial photographs of airplanes, spy plane taking photographs of Cuba having nuclear missiles, which were obtained from the Soviet Union. And Soviet soldiers were also on the ground in Cuba. It is a big threat to the United States because right in its backyard, there are nuclear tipped missiles overlooking the United States. So Kennedy asked for advice, and there were people around his committee, ex committee, presidential committee, like Vice President, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, all these people, higher officials. They were advising him to invade and take out those missiles, use a military operation. But Kennedy did not want to do a military operation because he did not want to escalate the war and accidentally exchange nuclear weapons between these countries, which could result in hundreds of millions of Americans' death and also Soviet death. And so he asked to send a telegram to Khrushchev, who was the leader of the Soviet Union, to de-escalate, to de-escalate, de-escalate the conflict. And they made a deal so that if Khrushchev could remove the nuclear weapons from Cuba, in exchange, the president of the United States agreed to remove nuclear weapons of the United States kept in Turkey overlooking the Soviet Union. So we did remove it later after they removed it from the Cuba. So Cuban Missile Crisis was a very tense moment. Two countries, powerful nuclear weapons countries, came close to looking at each other, and one of them blinked, according to Arthur Schlesinger, the historian, because it could have gone the other way and resulted in a catastrophe, nuclear catastrophe. And so Kennedy did play these cards very well and saved us from the brink of abyss. And so now, when the Cuban Missile Crisis, the unipolarity moment started to emerge. As I already have said, from 1973 onward, Soviet Union started to weaken, and the United States started to emerge. And in 1991, the Soviet Union imploded. And so, what happened? Because of its economic crisis, it got dismembered. Many countries came out of the Soviet Union. It's not like one empire, but Russia is still there, but other countries, Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, all these countries came out of it and become independent of the control of the Soviet Union. So now the United States is the only superpower standing after the Cold War. And the United States moment was a unipolar moment. That means it's sole dominating the entire world. And it is a very, very Francis Fukuyama, a scholar, wrote, it's end of history, he wrote. The capitalism and democracy won, communism and authoritarian states lost. But there's a new threat which came in the horizon, which was in the beginning of the millennia, 2001, September 11, 9/11 happened, which were new form of threat, not from states, but non-state actors. These are terrorists, transnational terrorists coming from other countries, especially the ones who came to do the attack in the United States were from Saudi Arabia, most of them. And they came, Al Qaeda was a terrorist organization. They came and attacked three important pivotal places of the United States. They attacked the Twin Towers, economic symbol of the United States, so where the World Trade Center was. And they attacked that, and another plane and went and attacked Pentagon. And the Pentagon is the symbol of American military power, the hub, right? And another plane, third plane, was flying towards DC, and it's assumed it could have been targeting the White House or the Congress because it's a political power, seat of political power. So they attacked economic, military, and political. But before reaching the target, the third plane was brought down by its own passengers. And so this created a new threat for the United States rather than from the states, non state actors. So President Bush, George W. Bush was the president at the time, and he went into war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan is the right war because Al Qaeda was using Afghanistan as a base for training, and so United States military went in to kick them out because we asked for Taliban, which was the government of Afghanistan, to kick the terrorists out, but they did not. So then when our military went in, but we went in wrongly into Iraq because of Bush policies saying that Saddam Hussein is linked with the terrorists, even though there's no way. Saddam is not as religious fundamentalist as the terrorists, and there is no way he is linked. And the United Nations even disproved the document Bush showed that Saddam Hussein is collecting nuclear material to make nuclear bombs from Niger. And the UN looked at it and said, like, no, this is not true documents. But Bush didn't care. Either way, I'm going in whether to other countries' support or not. This is different from his father, because his father in the 1990s went into Middle East fighting a war against Saddam when Saddam Hussein occupied Kuwait, where his father, Bush Sr., when he was president in the 1990s, created a multilateral coalition. So he brought, including Russia, into the coalition. All the forces of the world, great powers, joined together to kick out Saddam Hussein. Whereas here, Bush went alone with the help of Canada and the UK, but most of the world refrained from joining US to go out and kick Saddam Hussein out of his own country. He was arrested and hung to death. So now, after that war, Barack Obama came into office and he pulled out of Iraq, as you might know. Now, the United States is facing a gamble or security issues from multiple areas, which is what we're going to talk today in this lecture, especially focus on it. The first one, write it down. There are 7 things I'm going to discuss. The first one is North Korean missile crisis. So United States faces this biggest international security threat from North Korea. North Korea, as you might know, in the Korean Peninsula, they are in the north, and the South Korea is the Seoul, is the big city, and the South Korea is capitalistic and democratic. North Korea is authoritarian and communistic. It is the only totalitarian country in the world. Totalitarian ideology means using force to fuse economy, society, and state together. And the people don't have equality or freedom, and they live in bondage. And the 3 generations of authoritarianism, grandfather, father, and grandson ruling the country, and the grandson is now grooming his daughter. If you see in photographs, when he's launching nuclear missiles, he's bringing his young daughter, who looks like 10 or 13, to watch the nuclear missiles. So North Korea's biggest they always create a propaganda that the United States started the Korean conflict, even though the Korea conflict was started by North Korea invading South Korea. But they preach to all their kids in their country that the Americans are a big threat, and so we have to be constantly prepared for war. And so they do, and they are building nuclear weapons. They have detonated nuclear bombs. Now they're finding ways to deliver it. One thing is to have a bomb, but another thing is to deliver it. So to deliver the bomb, they need nuclear missiles, the missile rockets, to carry the bomb all the way to the west coast of the United States. If you look at the map, it has to cross the Pacific Ocean, right? North Korea at the end of at the border of China, right? And China is the only country which keeps North Korea alive by supplying oil and all their needs. It's a pariah state, which cheated on the treaty of Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, and created this nuclear weapon, and now working on improving their delivery mechanism. Now they have the capacity to deliver a nuclear bomb to Guam, the United States territory, but some say it is almost there to deliver to the West Coast, California, or other regions. So it is a single big threat for the United States, and with their nuclear weapons and with their authoritarian state, it is the one which we should focus on, security issue in when we're talking about. The second one is Middle East. Middle East, as I have already said, uh, it's a powder keg. It's states which create problems and non-state actors. So Iran, for example, is not an Arab country. It is a Muslim country. It's a Shia majority, but Iran is supporting terrorists, Hamas and Hezbollah, and they're funding them. And these countries, when they send money and train terrorists, it creates problems in Middle East, especially against Israel, which is America's biggest ally in the Middle East. And there's been also ISIS, which is what? Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, which was the largest terrorist organization to come out of the Middle East. And they were occupying an area about the size of England, larger than England. And this organization, a terrorist organization, recruited fighters from around the world and had a charismatic leader, Abu al-Zarqawi, and he was killed. And then another guy came in, and he had a doctorate in Islamic theology, and he claimed himself as a caliphate because he comes from the Prophet Muhammad's line, Quraysh community, and he was also killed in the Bush administration. But the organization is in retreat now. Still, it's not eliminated. The threat is not eliminated. ISIS and Al Qaeda is weakened after killing of Bin Laden. And as you might know, the killing of Bin Laden happened in Pakistan, in Abbottabad compound, in a Navy SEAL raid. And there's been movies made on it, Dark Zero 30, if you want to watch. And there are good books, Manhunt by Peter Bergen, if you're interested in reading like a thriller, but a true story in nonfiction. And so Bin Laden was killed, but then his lieutenant, um, the physician from Egypt, took over power, and he was also eliminated one by one. Even though the heads are eliminated, it's like a hydra from the Greek. You cut the head, but there's other heads emerge. So the threats doesn't go away. In Middle East, we have the problem of terrorism and also the states. It's a chaotic environment which creates many security problems for the United States. The third one I wanted to talk about after North Korea and Middle East is China, the rise of China. That is a much larger problem, according to many scholars, because China, if you look at it, in the 1980s, were not a prosperous country. And Deng Xiaoping opened the markets and freed the economy, which made it prosperous. It started growing at an average rate of 10%, 10% per year. Can you imagine that growing like that for 30 years? No other country in the history of the world has grown at such a breakneck speed. And it brought out hundreds of millions of people out of poverty in China, and it became the second largest economy in the world, overtook Japan. And now they're poised to overtake the United States in long run, hoping by 2040. Of course, they have many economic problems of debt crises, and they're overextended. And this COVID also created an economic slump. So now technically India is the fastest growing economy in the world, but still China, because of its sheer size and the number of people, and it creates an economy that wealth is converted into military power. So when they convert that into military power, what do they want? They wanted to annex Taiwan, a small island nation in the outskirts of South China Sea, right? And was used to be called Formosa, and that is occupied by capitalistic democratic society, and it is supported by the United States. One of the reasons we support that, because we get a lot of integrated chip technology from it. So if the China annexes it using force, President Biden has said already 4 times that he will step in to rescue. We will not stand by and watch China take over the Taiwan. So the Taiwan, but they have been doing military planning of taking over of Taiwan, and China is watching closely Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the United States assistance of Ukraine. So they've been drawing plans how to counter in case they decide to go for Taiwan, and if the United States intervenes, how to fight out a war. It's a dangerous situation because these two are the largest powers now in the world, and China is also a nuclear power. Now they're building more and more nuclear warheads. They're increasing their nuclear warheads. They are modernizing their military. They have more men armed, and if we face them a battle in South China Sea, it is a very terrifying challenge. And so, what we need to think about is that how, through diplomacy, we could avoid such a conflict. And and while we wage the olive branch, we always have to prepare for war. The better way to achieve peace is to prepare for war, they say. So both sides are planning for the contingent operations in case it results in war. Now, the fourth one is Russia's sphere of influence. Russia, as you know, that is going on. The Russians are, especially with Putin, has invaded Ukraine, and the information he got will be a quick pick, whereas Ukrainian put up a resistance that they wouldn't have imagined. They fought hard for their country, and both sides' lives lost are innumerable. But there's Russian media does not give clear data of how many deaths the Russians have faced in battlefield. So are the Ukrainians not giving actual data, but they are willing to fight for their country. There is always in war, the, between an aggressor and those who defend, the spirit of defense is high. Clausewitz, who is a war scholar, who wrote the book called On War, and he said resistance is equal to strength of will times means. So means is the weapons, this number of soldiers, and technology you have. But strength of will comes from the heart, to willing to fight. So those who defend their countries will fight hard, and Ukraine is fighting harder than the Russians, who didn't have a clear-cut goal, and they've been changing constantly. They thought of taking over the entire country, going and taking over Kyiv, the capital, but it didn't happen. Now they're just taking over the east side of Ukraine and occupying the Donbass and other areas. And so the fight goes on because the resistance goes on. Resistance is there, and this, as the Ukrainians have the strength of will, their means are supplied by United States and its allies, the Western countries. So they were able to meet the match of the mighty Russia. Even though Ukraine is a small country compared to Russia's manpower and resources, they are being met in the battlefield, and the war continues. Russia thought if Ukraine would have fell easily, it will go and pick up next Moldova and even the Baltic countries. The Baltic countries are the three small countries: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and to build a wall against the encroachment of NATO. And so now Putin is mired in the conflict in Ukraine, and but time is on their side. Time is on the Russia side, because how long can they persist, the Ukrainians? And already they're getting depleted of war weary and resources. Only time will tell. The next one, fifth one, cyber weapons and warfare. Cyber weapons have been used as internet proliferated, and it is being used as a method of warfare, and it is becoming a bigger and bigger security issue, because there are two things. One, it is affecting the trade in itself of other countries, and when cyber technology is used or weaponized to attack, it could affect and obstruct trade and finance, and also it could be used as a lethal ways. And some of the ways the United States is the most vulnerable country for cyber attack, even though we have cyber technologists who are capable, cyber warriors who are capable of waging and taking the war to the other country. But we are vulnerable because we are connecting a lot of our things to internet. For example, electricity grids. Our electricity grids are connected to internet. So there's a book written called Lights Out, and if a full-fledged full-fledged cyber attack happens, it could take out our power transformers. That it'll take months to replace it, and it will darken the entire Northeast. Imagine without power, how long could you go? Especially hospitals and patients and ATMs, traffic lights, and the list goes on. And there are many books have been written on cyber warfare, and cyber warfare is becoming a bigger and bigger problem. It is also used along with the conventional warfare. That, for example, Russia before invading Georgia used cyber warfare, denial of services of websites, government websites, and other things in Georgia before they entered. So the sixth one, is terrorism. Terrorism is a growing problem. Terrorism is a tactic, very down, because terrorism is used usually by the weak against the strong. And terrorism, people have a hard time defining. Scholars had a very hard time defining for years to come up with a universal definition for terrorism. But they do have some four ingredients to be involved in order for an act to be called terrorism. And I have created an acronym for students to remember it easily. VISA, VISA. So visa, violence, it should have violence. Okay. All four should be checked before an act could be called terrorism. I is innocence, non-combatants. That means not soldiers. Soldiers are fair game in a warfare, but innocent civilians, non-combatants are targets. So violence, I, innocence, non-combatant civilians are target. S, it's staged. A terrorist wants an act to be known to the world. If you're a thief, you're stealing something, you don't want anybody to know. Then you could keep stealing. But if you're a terrorist, you want that to be in all the media, all the front pages of the newspapers, because they have a visa, a aim. There's an aim. An aim should be not individual aim like economic incentive for me to go and steal. It should be a larger than one individual. It should be for a group, for a country. A cause should be much larger. Aim, it's either religious or it could be nationalistic. That means political, and it could be economical, but larger economic benefit for their people. So terrorism is now a growing problem. As I said, it's the tactic of the weak used against the strong. As the United States is the super global power, now many countries are individual non-state actors will not be able to engage them directly in a battlefield. So what would you do? You do tactics which could increase your chances of victory and using violence. And many of them take the path of terrorism. So that's why now we need to have in the United States, not only in the federal government level, even city levels. Even if you look at New York City, it has terrorism, anti-terrorism units. And so if you look at the badges in the back, and you would see these are common, and even part of NYPD, there is a terrorism unit in the bigger cities like London, and Paris and others have faced terrorist attacks, and they will hopefully not, but governments spend enormous amount of money to prevent terrorist attacks, and it is a security threat, a security challenge. The next one, the last security challenge I wanted to talk about is climate change. Now, climate change is a global problem. It is a problem which no individual country cannot address. Why? Because no one has power to control it. Everyone should come together to solve this. But now, climate change, what is climate change? Anthropogenic, that means man-made climate change. Man-made climate change is different from the globe warming over a period of time. Man-made is faster. Its rate of heating is much faster. It started with the industrial revolution. Why? Because fossil fuels were dug out. Fossil fuels are carbon fuel, which includes oil, gas, natural gas, and also coal. The coal is the worst one, which releases more CO2. That's CO2 means carbon dioxide. And when you release burn fossil fuels, because why do you burn it? Because you need energy. Look around you, everything is energy. The iPad I'm teaching you is run by energy. Everything, the light to, and even your clothes you wear, it needs energy to manufacture. Everything needs energy, including your medicines, glasses. This goes on. We wouldn't be able to live the quality of life we are living without energy. And energy increase is happening dramatically as population has reached 8 billion people. By 2040, the energy demand will double. And most of it is coming from fossil fuels. As we burn, especially the rising powers like China and India, use more and more coal rather than alternative fuels, because alternative fuels cost money, more money per kilowatt than fossil fuels. So when we burn fossil fuels to improve developing, bringing people out of poverty, you are prone to increase the heat of the world. And when you do that, it affects multiple ways. One way, excuse me, I'm sick a little bit. One way it affects is affecting the biodiversity of the world. Plant and animal species are in decline. Okay, and you may think, so what, let the animals die? Well, when you let species die, it comes and affects us. It could be a form of diseases, because anytime a vacuum is created, that vacuum is spilled by a species which is able to adapt to the situation faster. Okay, and what could be more faster evolving and adapting than microorganisms? And some of them could be deadly and could create another plague. So humans creating this climate change has also created dramatic weather patterns, ranging from floods, fires, and, um, and desertification. The list goes on. All this, in it will make the world more unsustainable and harder to live a planet. And so for that, all countries come together and have created the Paris Climate Accord. And the United States under Trump has pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. Even Russia and North Korea is part of it, the treaty. And Trump administration pulled it out, but Biden administration rejoined the Paris Accords, because we are considered as the leader of the world, and we should act as one. And and we don't act, it also affects us, because every time a hurricane and others comes, it creates billions of dollars loss for our economy and for people. Anyway, these are the 7 important security challenges we face. Now, with that, I will finish this lecture, and good luck. Next time, I will talk to you about financial and other structures.